All righty, perfect. So let's get started. So first, I want to make sure to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Nicholas Wright, and I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Human Development Institute for the University of Kentucky. I use pronouns he, him, and his, and a visual description of myself is I'm a multiracial man in his upper 20s with short black hair, a beard, a white collared shirt, and a brown striped tie. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us today on this monthly diversity discussion. I know that we've been working in these monthly diversity discussions to become more culturally competent and working with this. And we've, of course, done some various training on diverse components, such as in the Jewish community and on disability and girlhood and on DEI and on inclusion, on different things like that. But today what we're going to be focusing on is building inclusive excellence. We're going to focus on building inclusive excellence. Here it is. It's Tuesday, May 16th at 11 a.m. And I look forward to what we can do in this conversation today. I look forward to really learning more about inclusive excellence, because I think that as we talk about DEI and we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think a few people have asked that before, is how in the world do we keep up? How in the world do we find the time or make the ways to continuously be adept and continuously learn and continuously grow? And I think that in this rapidly evolving world, I think that embracing diversity and creating that inclusive environment, it has become just really the moral imperative, but also a strategic advantage. When we talk about building that inclusive excellence, I think this is a transformative journey. It's something that propels all organizations, but especially Human Development Institute, towards a community that we can have greater success, we can have that collaboration, and we can really have that creativity that's in there, okay? During today's conversation, we're going to be joined by Dr. Cristia Brown, and in this conversation, we're going to talk more about what it means to actually build the inclusive excellence. So today, I'm hoping that we can not only just have this discussion on inclusive excellence, but what we can do is we can learn some practical ways to go on this journey, okay? All right, so I wanna make sure that we have this and people can take the best advantage of this opportunity that we have most of this advantage and most of this opportunity that's here. When we think about this, you can always stay involved with it. One, by using the chat. A few people have already done that this morning, saying good morning, giving some shout outs with it. Please feel free to use the question answer option in the chat that you have, or you can just ask questions in the chat. Okay, I strongly encourage that because we have an expert here on building inclusive excellence, and it's important that we gain as much knowledge as we possibly can. All right. So as I said before, today we have Dr. Cristia Brown here. So let's start this conversation. So Dr. Brown, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Would you mind introducing yourself and sharing with us more about your position, your research interests? Just feel free to introduce yourself however you'd like.
Sure. So as you said, I'm Cristia Brown, and I'll follow your lead and give myself a visual description as well. So I am white, female, with glasses and a purple shirt and scarf, and I'm in my late 40s with dangly earrings, and I'm sitting in my office over in Patterson Office Tower with my kind of photos from my office in the background. So in my role here, I'm the Associate Dean of Inclusive Excellence in the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm also a professor of developmental psychology in the Department of Psychology. And I am a researcher. I'm also making sure I'm keeping in mind with all the chats too. I'm a researcher by training who studies the development and impact of stereotypes and discrimination across race and ethnicity, immigration status, gender and gender identity, and sexual orientation, and how that affects how kids learn about stereotypes, how they are affected by discrimination, and the ways that we can reduce that, particularly in school context. And so I've spent a lot of time at UK since 2007. I founded the Center for Equality and Social Justice and have tried to do a lot of service here to reduce the biases and promote equity and inclusion at UK, and then just in society at large. So my expertise also kind of aligns with my administrative position. So I'm a researcher that studies how to reduce bias. And in my job, my goal is to reduce bias that affects the people, particularly the students, faculty, and staff in the College of Arts and Sciences.
Thank you so much. So I know that as we were talking before, we talked about how you are super busy with everything. I mean, when we think about your role, how you have on, and it's such a big commitment when we focus on DEI, especially in the world we're living in today. Caring for individuals, making sure that they feel that they matter, making sure that they feel like they belong here at the University of Kentucky. And that's something that we always want to do. I know that with your teaching and your administrative roles, it's a challenge to really find that time to do it, but I'm glad that you do it so well. Okay?
Well, yeah, thanks.
So as we talk about inclusive excellence, as we talk about building this one, and it's even in your professional title, as we described. So can you tell us more about what inclusive excellence is and why it's important?
I mean, I think one of the ways in which we've kind of started using that language and moving kind of away from just simply diversity, equity types of language is to say that really, diversity is really a numerical situation, right? That's just, do we represent the range of kind of human variation, which, I think we 100% need to, because that's a critical part of an institution, right? We're better when we're more diverse, and diverse in all the ways in which humans differ. But I like the term inclusive excellence because it also says that if we're not an inclusive space, if we don't make all of those people feel really welcome and equally welcome and valued, if we don't have a strong sense of belonging for everyone, then we can never be great. We can never have excellence unless we also have inclusion. And that those really do go hand in hand. And so part of the idea of inclusive excellence is to be our very best, we have to make sure everyone is valued, feels heard, feels a strong sense of belonging and respect, and that we do that for everybody, and that everyone is equally wanted here and knows it. And so I think it's those two things that you can't separate. To be excellent, we have to be inclusive. And so I like the idea of, and also the fact that it should go into everything, right? Being inclusive should factor into every single thing that we do. From the small details to the big policies, that's in the individual interactions, to the ways in which we hire people. It really has to be factored into everything. And so I think that's part of it, is to capture the breadth of why inclusion is important everywhere.
Yeah, and I really enjoy how you talked about that. In order to be excellent, you have to be inclusive. You have to have those go hand in hand as we're working with them. I think that a lot of times, as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially when it comes to diversity, it's more about or at least people view it as what you may be able to see as on the billboard, something that's more apparent, diversity that can just be seen, and they're not necessarily going with the experiences that go with that diversity, that go with those experiences, and maybe talk about some of the oppression or the stereotypes that go along with it. So there's just so much more to it as we go in. And I like that when you talked about inclusion, it's more than just what we can do in a strategic plan. It's more than just that. I think that it goes to those daily interactions that we have, those daily interactions that we have with colleagues, or that we have with our supervisors, or the individuals that we supervise. I think it's just so much more to it. And I think that those small interactions really build that inclusive culture, build that's something that we're striving towards.
Yeah, I mean, I know I had a conversation with the department, I guess last week or maybe the week before, kind of having these conversations about what can people do. And, there's so many things that are out of our control. I mean, one of the things we talked about briefly yesterday is, a lot of the legislation that's going through, a lot of the kind of big issues we don't have a lot of control over. And so, but all of us can make our workplaces and our learning opportunities more inclusive in lots of different ways. I was like, there's every single person can do something every day to make their spaces in which they live more inclusive. And I think if everybody thought about what can I do today to be more inclusive in my interactions and in the policy, for folks that are setting policies, whether it be managers in an office that are having to set kind of practices, for how something happens. are the practices inclusive? Are the people that are coming into my office treated with a sense of inclusion, right? Like everybody, no matter what their position or role, can be mindful every day. And so I think if we all did that, then that's eventually how we kind of start to move the needle.
Yeah, talking about those small moments that are there. And I think that by having those small moments, taking those small initiatives, those daily initiatives that are in there, I think that's how we can find ways to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're a part of and they're integrated in all aspects of here at the Human Development Institute. When we make those decisions, those daily decisions that are there. So if we're describing, let's say, culture, we're describing that. I know that culture is something that's constantly changing as we go on with it. And it's something that's difficult to capture, but even more difficult to change at times. If we think about it in that way, how can we create a culture that celebrates diversity, but also promotes inclusivity and promotes some of these things that we were talking about when we talk about excellence?
I mean, I think thinking about kind of that culture shift, kind of culture change, part of it is having these conversations. I think having conversations is actually really profound. I think when it comes to issues around diversity, in all the ways in which we're diverse, we often think about, there's often a lot of taboos about talking about it. And the reality is to say, we do differ. We all differ in lots and lots of ways. And we really have to kind of put language to that and talk about it, and to say these are important conversations. Things don't change if we ignore them, right? Like, our society's not going to change, our culture's not going to change just because we want it to. So partly we have to have difficult conversations. We have to kind of sit in the discomfort of thinking about, what can I do differently? What can I help my colleagues do differently? I think we have to hold each other accountable as a big part of that culture shift. So when we see something happening, there's lots of gracious ways to help hold each other accountable. Whether it be taking a colleague aside. I was in this DEI leaders meeting on campus a couple of weeks ago, and a colleague said something that was not really appropriate. It's just a phrase that is in English vernacular. They didn't mean anything by it. They just used a phrase that we realized was not a very inclusive phrase. And one of my colleagues said, "Do you think I should say something to them?" And I said, "Yeah, I think you can, with kindness," kind of whispered in her, "Hey, you may want to rethink about how you say that." And did it with a gracious spirit, but was also holding her, but we also knew this colleague did not mean it that way and would probably appreciate it. So I think that's part of the culture change, where we give each other grace, but we also hold each other accountable. I think that's part of it. And so it's like being candid and honest, and just owning where we have privileges and how can I use my privileges to help others, to make sure that I'm using those privileges to promote inclusion and make changes where I can. I think that's all part of what we need to do, those kind of cultural shifts.
Yeah, I think that's how we can, just as you said, make those cultural shifts that are in there. I know that as we talk about accountability can be challenging. It can be challenging at times, especially when we think about accountability with our colleagues, or even our supervisors at times, addressing this. And I like how you said, with grace, doing it with grace. Because a lot of times when we think about accountability, we're thinking about accountability in the sense of a repercussion or a penalty or something that's attached to it. And I think that people have to view it more as, I know that how I view criticism, especially as people do it critically, is that people, when they're critically criticizing me, they're doing it in a way that's more giving me feedback and that's more helpful than anything, that they're investing in me, that they're taking that time to do with me. And I think that that's how it is with our interactions as well, is that these individuals care so much about me that we want to make sure that I am a little bit better, that I can work with, and that we can care for this culture that we're trying to build, that we're working for.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the idea of like, I'm going to assume that you're wanting to be inclusive. And so my assumption is coming at this of that you're a good person, that you're wanting to be inclusive. So, hey, you might not have realized this thing really was a barrier there. And so I think that's a very different spirit than I want to police your behaviors or call you out in a way that's embarrassing. And I think the reality too is we all want to be good people. I think that's a universal. We all want to think of ourselves as good people. And so it can feel threatening, and it can really be harmful to feel called out, for example, on like racism. And so I think we have to be delicate when we do it, to say, I know you probably didn't mean to do this. I just wanted to give you a heads up. So to be kind of mindful of how particularly these types of accountability can land. I think it's particularly delicate because of just the sensitivity of the topic.
Yeah, I know with the sensitivity of the topic, I know that some people with privilege or may not have had as much exposure to some of this topic. I think that we all have to understand that we're not all coming from the same point. We're not all coming from the same foundation of DEI, or at least the expertise or the education that's on there. And I think it's important to give grace when we can, give those opportunities, but also, of course, a big one that's there is, instead of calling people out, calling them in. But I think that we also have to make sure that we take the most of those learning opportunities when we do get called out, when we do get when we get held accountable. We have to make the most of those opportunities, because I look at it as, I think that it's okay to make a mistake, but making that same mistake over and over and over, I think that we just have to find some ways to work to change that and change our mindset a little bit to be inclusive.
Yeah. And to know that change is hard. It's hard for us. But that deciding to change, just like any kind of bad habits we have, it takes work, but that they're all possible. And so we have to really be committed to ourselves to make changes. And when we're called out, to not feel defensive, but just to kind of sit and reflect and think, oh, I could do that better. And that it's not a reflection of my character or my ethics. And that really the sign of kind of my character is that I'm willing to make changes and to reflect and think about, how can I do this better? And think that every day, right? Every day for everything, we should be thinking, how can I make today better than yesterday? What can I do that's lifts up others, as opposed to kind of holding them down?
Yeah, finding those ways to lift up others and finding those opportunities to invest in ourselves. Because that's really what this work is we're finding ways to become even better, to invest in ourselves. Yeah, so as we move forward with it, we talked about building that inclusive excellence. We're building that. And I think that if building the inclusive culture or building the inclusive excellence, if that was something that was easy, I think that everyone would be doing it. And I think that Cristia Brown, I think that we would both be out of a job if that was the case, if it's something that was that easy to do. But building inclusive excellence, I think it's something that's challenging. I think that you talked a little bit about the barriers already, but something that's challenging. And I think that building that culture and building that excellence, it has so many disruptors that are in line with it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the barriers when it comes to achieving the inclusive excellence? How can we overcome these identified barriers? So what are some barriers, and then how can we overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I always think, as has been said to me before, systems work as designed. And this system, at the University of Kentucky, for example, was designed to teach white men, was who the system was designed for. And so to change that is going to take effort. It's not going to just, so we have to push against that. That was the status quo. So to do anything new is going to mean changing systems. Our country is, steeped in a long history of white supremacy, patriarchy, ableism. Like, there's a whole host of ways in which our system was built to be exclusive. And so knowing, first of all, going in, there are barriers. And often there's barriers not at the individual level, but in policies. And so that's one of the big things I do, is that to think about, not only do we have to do it in the hearts and minds of individuals, we also have to change the policies and the structures, because those are the structures. There's that great book, Racism Without Racist, right? We can have biases embedded in the system that individuals aren't trying to perpetuate biases, but they're still there. And so how can we look at every policy to reevaluate? Do we need to do something different? So, one of those barriers then is the idea of, well, we've just always done it that way, right? So there may be some system and the answer is, well, we've just always done it that way. I think one example that is relevant in my work as a professor is, when we have students that apply for graduate school, we've always required the GRE. We've always required a certain amount of money to enroll, to apply, so kind of application fees. And those are barriers to people that don't have the economic resources to pay for those things. And so thinking about, well, do we have to, I think COVID was kind of one of the maybe only benefits of COVID was that it allowed us to rethink, well, what's actually necessary? Yes, we've always required it, but does it really tell us anything? Are there ways we can redo it to be more inclusive? So one of the things we've done is drop that as a requirement, and we've trying to provide complete scholarships for application fees. And so that was a barrier to being inclusive. It prevented potentially some great graduate students from applying. So, we can't be excellent if we're excluding people based on how much money they have to apply. And it was a matter of rethinking it to think, that will we really have to do this, or could we redo it in a different way? And so I think that's an important thing that everybody can do, and whatever their positions are, is to rethink, okay, all the policies, how much of them, what's required, or is it just, this is just the way we've always done it? And is everything necessary? I think that's been those are often the biggest barriers. But yet in many ways are the ones that are the most exclusionary, but it allows us to rethink. It's like, we just need to have folks really committed to rethinking how we do things. And I think that's a big step towards inclusive excellence.
Yeah, rethinking how we do things. And you're right. A lot of people will say, well, that's how we've always done it. And it's like, I believe that they may think that that's a synonym to that being right, when that's not the case.
Right.
Just because somehow you always done it, this is a traditional model, doesn't mean that it's always been the right model, or has ever been the right model. That's with
Right.
it. I think that we have to challenge our way of thinking. Yeah, I think that we have to challenge that.
Yeah, and I think, again, just thinking about, is this a moment I can be more inclusive than I currently am? I think one of the things that I've shifted in my own thinking is in lectures, giving talks, often people will say, oh, I don't need the microphone, I can just speak loudly. Until it was pointed out to me that that's an issue of inclusion, and that people that are kind of hard of hearing, for example, need you to have the microphone, and that, yes, you may feel like you're loud enough, but you're not, and that's actually not being inclusive. And for me, that was actually a big light bulb moment to think, oh, I can be more inclusive when I give talks. And so it's like kind of always thinking, what can I do here that's more inclusive? Because there's always room for progress, and thinking, I'm going to have to I don't like having a microphone. It feels kind of talk showy to me. But to think, well, but this is why I'm doing it. And so I need to get over my own discomfort, because that's how I make this space more inclusive. So I think that those are the barriers too of, well, I've personally always done it a certain way. And so kind of holding ourselves accountable to make changes once things have been pointed out to us.
Yeah, and that goes with making changes and holding yourself accountable, regardless of your pedigree, regardless of your background, regardless of your education degree or the title that you hold. I think that with all of that, finding those ways every single day to learn and to be more, and to find those ways to be more inclusion. Yeah, I think that being that inclusive practice is something that's important to have. And it's something that's so much more than just the personal interactions that we have. It goes into the policies that may discriminate or be unfair. Those policies that, I think that if we can find those ways for the practicing of policies to be more inclusive and equitable for everyone, I think that's how we can create a more just society, especially with individuals that we work with. Yeah. So as we talk about some of those, and we talk about policies and procedures, a lot of people will have that conversation. They'll say, especially people who are educated on a lot of the evaluations, they may say that if you didn't evaluate it or measure it, did it even happen? Did it even happen? Does it even exist? Okay, and we're constantly charged with assessment and evaluations and surveys and ways to try to measure the work that we do and in the effectiveness that we do. How can we measure progress? I mean, when we talk about inclusive excellence and toward diversity, equity, and inclusion, how do we measure that? What metrics do we use?
That's a great question. I mean, I think you're right. That's the tricky part. And so I think that's where things like equity circle in too, of, always looking at, well, what are the outcomes we want? So do we want more diversity among our students? So we need to look at who's applying. Are there inequalities in who's, are there inequities in who's here? Are there inequities in who's applying? So that's a numerical question. We can look at that. We can get those numbers. And then if there's inequities in who's applying, then we have to think about, well, why are they not applying? And then we change our recruitment strategies or how we're displaying ads for things, right? So knowing where the inequity is helps us know what strategy to take. Are there differences in promotion? Are there differences in salary? So kind of looking at the outcomes and looking at lots of them. So part of it in terms of measuring, and this is where I think it gets tricky, is we also have to acknowledge that we have to ask about identities. So, there's this tricky kind of balance of, we don't necessarily want to ask folks about their race or ethnicity or their gender identity or sexual orientation and things like that. But actually, if we don't ask about them, then we're not able to measure, are we becoming more inclusive? And so it's that we always have to, and this differs across context and scenarios, but we're always having to say, we also have to keep records and we have to keep track of how are folks in different identity groups doing in this way, because ignoring those divisions actually allows inequities to persist. And so we have to balance those needs of, we want to be inclusive and not kind of point out differences necessarily. But yet if we don't keep records, then it allows us to ignore where inequalities may be happening. And so I think that's a big part of kind of measuring outcomes, is thinking, what's the outcomes that are important here? And I'm going to have to either survey or ask or kind of keep track of it. And so I think someone's job always has to be to have to kind of keep track, because but I think the equity part is one way. One way that we can infer inclusion is, are some folks leaving at higher rates than other folks? Well, one of the reasons is, if it's not an inclusive space, folks will go elsewhere. So can we be thinking about the experiences here, and are we able to see that in kind of that group's success?
Yeah, and it's finding those ways to measure that. I know that something that can be challenging when we talk about asking or collecting this information, because a lot of people have these thoughts, especially as we talk about more, say, sensitive information or information that's not as apparent. And with them, when we ask them about it, they may have a lot of thoughts with it. And one of the biggest reasons why I think they do not participate or choose to not disclose is because they're thinking, oh man, they may use this against me. And they don't want that, which that's understandable, because in the past, traditionally, it has been used against them, not by us, but through societal.
Yeah, and so I think partly being candid of, this is only like, this is why we're asking. It's to hold us accountable to be equitable and inclusive. I think in a lot of Europe, I teach abroad often, and like in France, for example, they are not allowed to get ethnicity information. And it comes from a good, and also in Germany too, and it comes from a good place of having gone through the Holocaust, where religion and identity were used to, horrific consequences. They pass laws where you can't ask that information, right? So here's the extreme example. So they don't ask that information because they never wanted it to be used against people. The problem is biases are in place that are continuing to happen in terms of race, for example. And yet, because they're not allowed to ask, these inequalities are sitting there, and they're not able to address it. So it's one of those, like, I think not asking comes from a good place, but the problem is, kind of the flip side is it prevents us from knowing, where do we need to make changes? So I think being honest with people and saying, we're asking this is why, this is what we're going to do with this information, so that people feel that they're that it's not being used to exploit people, but it's really to further our goals of inclusion.
Yeah, in going with that and making sure that people understand, being transparent, that's with it. You talked a little bit about how you were, when you were teaching abroad and starting some of those. I know that Burner described context in various systems, and one of those systems was the chrono system, or thinking about in time. And a part of time is the historical impact that's there. And you talked about the Holocaust, you talked about the historical impact that's there. And I think that with us as well here is that the historical impact of politics and how that can impact people as well. So I definitely understand how that's challenging, but being transparent is a good way for that.
Yeah, and I think transparency is part of inclusion, right? It's the idea that everyone should have access to this knowledge. Everyone should have access to this information. And that often which doesn't feel inclusive, is if we feel like some people are the kind of knowledge brokers and other people aren't. And if I can be candid about my successes and my failures and say, these are what my goals are, this is why I'm asking, if there's problems, here's some ways in which you can address it. I think transparency is part of this idea of kind of inclusive excellence. We have to be as transparent as possible, right? There's going to be limitations, but I think as much as possible, we have to be candid with people.
Yeah, being candid and having that transparency that's there. I think that's important. I know you mentioned this earlier in the conversation. So going back to that, you mentioned a little bit about politics and society and things. And just now we were talking about how in the chrono system, how it impacts political landscape and context. And I think that with DEI, it's apparent right now. I want to get your opinion on this. As we go on and we continue doing the work with diversity, equity, and inclusion in the current litigation and a little bit combating that, how do we continue working in diversity, equity, and inclusion with everything going on in litigation? How do we continue this work? How do we continue striving?
Well, I mean, I think, it's complicated. I think the first thing is being mindful of your own spirit and being restorative, because if you're committed to doing this work, when you see these bills being passed and people really saying such hateful things, it can be really discouraging. So part of it is just remembering, to put your own oxygen mask on first before others, right? I think especially if you're in these groups that are being targeted. In Kentucky right now, a lot of the anti-trans legislation. So if you're a trans person, being really mindful of your own spirit and kind of soul, and taking care of yourself, because I think that can be a part of it. But in terms of doing the work, it's thinking, well, how can I do the work? One of the things we do is try to institutionalize as many things as possible. How can we embed inclusive practices in as many places as possible so that they're not vulnerable to these kinds of attacks? And then also being creative, that, I am not committed to the word diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm committed to making the space diverse, equitable, and inclusive. But if I need to change the nouns, I will totally change the nouns, right? So that I don't think folks that are trying to spread hate and exclusion are particularly deep thinkers, because I think that if they were, they would be in support of diverse, equitable, inclusive spaces. We know that increases productivity, it increases workforce, it increases finances to the state. And so it is better, not just at a moral way, but in a real logistical, economic way. So they're clearly not really thinking through all of that. So I think, well, then I'll think deeply and we'll figure out how can we keep doing this even if folks are against it, because we know that this is how we protect those around us and that we make everyone feel welcome. So I can change names. We can change the title of a class. We'll just keep teaching what we're doing. We'll keep doing the things we're doing. Just duck your head and know that we're doing the right thing. And I think that is just kind of keeping consistent. And, when speakers come, for example, that are really exclusionary, we we'll offer counter programming. We can't prevent them from coming, but we can offer counter programming, and trying to balance all of that with positive ways to affirm our folks. And I think that's just the way. So it's be creative, try to institutionalize things as much so that they're kind of structurally protected from these laws. And then just kind of reminding yourself that this is important work. And, you know, I would say the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I mean, I think knowing that this is part of it, that these things don't happen overnight. We just have to keep doing the good work, you know, making good trouble.
Yeah, I know it's something that may not happen overnight. I know it can get discouraging at times, but knowing that the work continues, knowing that we push forward to it. I know that for both of us, we are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion. We're committed to this work. And like you said, maybe not the nouns that are in there, that we can change the nouns to transformational or social justice or advocacy or whatever else is there. But our work is something that continues, because the work is something that's just so important. When we talk about belonging, when we talk about that sense of matter, I always go back to my research, and we always talk about Abraham Maslow. And of course, in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, on the third tier is love and belongingness that's there. So a lot of times people want to think of belongingness as just a feeling that's there. And people will say that I don't care about your feelings, or they may say some things like that, but it's so much more than that. When we think about it in motivational, that sense of mattering, that sense of belonging that's in there, it leads to people's, and it leads to retention and progression, and it allows to productivity. It relates to so many things and leads to that. I think that we have to maybe even talk about that a little bit more, and that way we can express that in the way that we communicate. And that's how we can show that DEI is important. It's important not just for us, not just for the people that are here, but for our company, our Human Development Institute, the University of Kentucky, all of us together. That's how we progress.
I think, you know, that's the thing about human beings. We're social creatures, right? It's allowed us to, as a society, it's allowed us to build societies over time. It's allowed us to, you know, have families and friend groups. We are social creatures. It's what's one of the best things about humanity. But the flip of that is we do have a really strong inborn need to belong. We want to feel valued. And I think that's a great need to have, right? We want to feel like we fit in and that people value us. And yeah, so like that is a crucial part of what we need to survive and to thrive. And and then there's all this research that shows, you know, we see belonging is one of the biggest predictors of graduating here. You know, feeling a sense of belonging well above your actual GPA. Do you feel like you fit in, and do you feel like you belong? And so if you're going to look at metrics, belonging is a big one, but also it's just as humans, we all want that. You know, there's a reason we all wear, you know, UK blue, and you drive around the state and you see more UK blue in this, you know, state than anywhere else, because people want to feel like they're part of something bigger, and that they have a group that they belong to. And so I think that to pretend that we don't need that, you know, in these other ways that we're talking about, is kind of ignoring all the ways in which we seek out belonging in all the other parts of our lives too.
Yeah, I know there's billions of people in this world, and we're all created differently. All of us are. But one thing that we do have in common is we all have the need to belong. I think that everyone that I've ever met, everyone wants to feel belonging. I think I've met maybe one or two people that could say, I don't need to belong, but maybe they need to get connected.
They probably, yeah. And I'd say they probably do. They're just not able to articulate it.
Yeah. So thank you so much for everything so far, Dr. Brown. And I appreciate you just participating in this, but not only participating in this conversation right here, all of the connections you've had with Human Development Institute, because it was so nice that when we're in conversation, I asked you about the Human Development Institute and I was going over a spiel. You said, yeah, I know all about the Human Development Institute, because you participated so much with us, that you've been involved with accessibility. You've served on dissertation committees for a few of the employees that are here, a few of the colleagues. You've taught classes, as what I'm seeing in the chat, for individuals. So thank you so much just for committing to this work and working with the Human Development Institute, finding those ways to collaborate with that. And I know that that's something that's going to continue going.
Yeah, and I think, I can tell, say this because, I mentioned it to you previously, is that, I think one of my big tasks next year is really focusing on accessibility. And I know, and so I'll be reaching out to HDI next year to think, because I think folks there are so thoughtful about all the ways in which access matter. And I think you can't have inclusion without full accessibility for everybody. And that's in lots of different ways, right? I mean, that's why it's like, I'm gonna have to put together a task force, because it's so ingrained in really everything. But I think that's a key part of inclusion, is we have to all have equal access to the learning environment, to the workplace, and we come far short. And so I think that's a way in which I'll be reaching out soon too, to kind of get expertise and thinking about things that I maybe probably take for granted and don't think about. So it's nice having that kind of relationship.
Well, thank you. I think that's great. And I appreciate you taking on those initiatives and making sure that access and accessibility is a part of DEI, part of our work here, because we want to make sure that people have full access to all parts of life. And that's everyone. And also, I want to make sure wanted to share that connection with everyone who's in the chat or in the audience right now, just to invite you to ask any questions that you may have. I know that we have an expert here, and we want to make sure that we can have some of that knowledge that's there. Okay. So as the questions come in, I'm going to just continue asking questions that are here. I know that leadership is something that is important to any organization. I think it's important to any organization, but I think it's to set the tone and give some direction. And I'm glad to be a part of the leadership team here at the Human Development Institute. I think that I truly care about the work here, and everyone else truly cares about the work and on our mission and the colleagues that we work with, trying to make sure that it can be better, not just for them, but for everyone. So can you talk a little bit about what role leadership plays in building that inclusive excellence? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I think I'm saying hi to Karen. I do know a lot of people in the chat. And so, wait, let me get back to my thing. Okay. I think part of leadership can be, I think how I think of it is it's really a service position, in that I think being a leader really should be one of service, of thinking, how can I facilitate the work that you're doing? And how can I use whatever kind of access to resources that I have to make sure that this is an inclusive space as possible. So I think part of what leadership is less about me telling people what to do and more about how can I be a conduit of service, and like, how can I facilitate you and the work that you need to do. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think leadership can be good in terms of helping to set some priorities. We have finite resources. And so I think it's useful to be able to say, why don't we focus on these few things for this coming year, so that we can really all kind of funnel the resources. But I think a big part of what I do is kind of matchmaking in many ways, is what it feels like, of being able to say, oh, I've heard this person is interested in this, and this person over here is interested in this. Let me put you all together so that you can do this. So kind of the, providing the megaphone to folks that need it. And so being able to amplify and facilitate and help people that have lots of ideas be able to do those fabulous ideas. So I think that's a big part of it, is it's less about setting, part of it is setting the agenda, but I think a big part of it is taking one of service and thinking, let me use this position to garner resources in ways that can be helpful.
Yeah, you're using those leadership opportunities to as acts of service. I think a big thing that's there is leaders lead from the front and bosses lead from the back, or direct from the back that's there. And I think that making sure that we are in here doing the work, actually doing the work that needs to be done and leading by example. I think that's always important to have.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I also think, that's, you have to hold yourself to high, standards. And so, and kind of modeling the behavior that, as a psychologist, I think, we want to model the behavior that we want others to see, and thinking about, I got to be kind of hold myself to a high standard, so that I can ask the same of others.
Yeah, holding ourselves to that high standard and doing the work that's in
Yeah.
there. It's more than just about talking about the work or even expressing the work that needs to be done, the necessity of that, but also being the ones to doing the work in there.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. It's just it has to be acts of doing. I think that's a real issue too with these topics. Is I think there's so much lip service paid to diversity. I think it's often trotted out when it's convenient. And I think that folks that are in marginalized groups or kind of disenfranchised groups are really cynical about that. And so I think how you have to kind of earn that trust and respect is to actually do things, to get things done, not just let me talk about it and do kind of platitudes, but how can I really have action. And I think that's a real critical part of this is, the statements of protest or, the kind of statements of support, the thoughts and prayers, right? We have so much of that. And that I think folks have lost some patience with, understandably, to say, no, I don't care about your thoughts and prayers. I want to see action. What are you doing? And I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. Doing work that you can actually measure, that people can view that's there. I know that I just wrote a piece, and in the piece was talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, talking about multicultural competence. And I think that it's so much more than just hiring an expert on DEI. Because I think that a lot of people, they may think that we can hire an expert on DEI and then boom, it's solved. We don't have any issues or the barriers are solved and now we're an equitable program, but it doesn't necessarily work that fast. In fact, it's not even a marathon when we go on it because a marathon has a finish line. And as I talked about before, I think that when it comes to having that truly inclusive, accessible culture for every single person, I think that it's a long ways to go. I think that with it, it's work that's ongoing. It's work that may not have a finish line in sight, but will continuously get better. And it's work that we continuously have to do, but it's important work.
Yeah, and I think too, because I think the issues are constantly evolving too, so I think things we think about now, I didn't think about 10 years ago. I think, it's not only, it's like the end is constantly changing. And so the issues are constantly changing. So it's a constantly evolving thought. That's why we can mess up so easily because things change, that things like language changes. The issues, one thing, kind of the one thing shifts and that leads to a cascading effect somewhere else. So then you have to go deal with those things. And so I think that just knowing that it's always going to be there. We have to just kind of keep at it and not get discouraged. I think not getting discouraged and feeling like every day I can do something, I think is a big part of how we keep the fight going.
Yeah, every day doing something. I know that some people with the ever-changing process with DEI or things surrounding DEI, I know that you were talking about 10 years ago. That 10 years ago, we used to use terms that we don't use today, and same way the terms that we use will change in 10 years. The process around it is as well. I know some people have even described DEI as you're aiming at a moving target. And I think that when it comes to that, it may not necessarily be so much that the target that's moving or anything, because our target has stayed the same, an equitable, just, inclusive society for all. I mean, that's stayed the same, but our platform has been moving, it's constantly changing, and the barriers that are in the way, that's something that's changing. That's something that's growing and developing throughout.
And I think that's, to me, a lovely way to, I kind of think about is that my goal is never different. I want this to be an inclusive, welcoming space that for everyone and that it reflect the diversity of humanity. That's always the same. And so it's also why I show grace to folks if they use the wrong term, for example. I was like, because the terms change. It's why I try to show grace if people misspeak. Because if people are showing up for the conversation, I will welcome it, right? You just want them to kind of show up and bring their kind of best self there. But if some of the details, it's like, don't get lost in the details of it. Like some of those change. And that's, I think if we get, too wrapped up in that, then we lose sight of the big issue. And the big issue is a big one. It's a tough one. But that part, we just keep saying, let's make this more inclusive for everybody, and let's make sure that we're representing the full range of society. And if I keep doing that, I think it also simplifies it, right? Like, I think then you're like, okay, I'm not going to worry about some of this other stuff. I'm just going to keep making sure that part is the goal. Every day, that's the goal. And to me, that is a much more encouraging, positive way than getting too distracted by either the naysayers or the details, or, I'm going to constantly try to, language matters and those things matter. But ultimately, the goal is not changing.
Yeah, their goal is not changing. So that's good to hear. And also, I think that those are just some tips that we can take on in our world as we are working with people, and we have colleagues that we're working with, or clients that we're working with, or supervisors, or whatever it is. We can provide that grace, but also those learning opportunities. And then when it comes to those learning opportunities, it's not just about when we're being held accountable. It's also those professional development opportunities that are there, because constantly changing, and regardless if we have our level of degree or educational background, it's important for all of us to continue on this journey, because the journey is ongoing.
Yeah, and I think too, as more and more people get a voice, so as more and more folks are able to say, hey, this is not meeting my needs, I'm not feeling included here, issues that were long ignored are going to continue to come up. So we have to also embrace that and think, oh, like, I didn't know about that, because the reality is those folks weren't able to voice those needs. And so let me be, as there's more and more needs, part of that we have to reflect on, that's actually a great thing, because it means this group is now able to express these needs that have probably always been there, but it wasn't able to come to the kind of level of public discourse. And so it's like, although it can feel overwhelming, like, we're trying to get access to more single user restrooms on campus so that folks, regardless of gender identity, feel safe using the restroom that they choose. That is a really hard challenge. And there's more and more calls for that. There's a challenge because of building codes and all sorts of other things. But I think it's great, though, that folks are able to say, hey, this is an important issue. And so it means that folks are able to express a need that I'm sure has long been there. So yes, it adds to the workload, but it also is a sign of progress, because folks are less marginalized than they were 10 years ago when this wasn't part of the conversation. So I think that that's those two things go hand in hand, the extra work, but it also means that there's more people that are able to, kind of say, this is what I need. And I think that's the ultimate, that's ultimately an optimistic point of view.
Yeah, and it's important to recognize those signs of growth, but also the work that is still needed that's there. And some people may say something such as, well, that's never been brought up before, or it's never been a problem before. It's always been a problem. It's always been a problem, but now these people have finally been heard, or this problem has finally been brought to the light. So that's, thank you for saying some of that. I know that you even have in the chat, some people said that when we talk about showing grace, is that I love that. Show grace to those who show up for the conversation. If they misspeak and use, let's say, an old term, showing grace encourages continuation, learning, and belonging that's there. And I think that's especially how it is in our Zoom world, because a lot of times we can get on to people about not having the cameras on or something like that, but at least the person is there. The person's there getting some of this communication, getting some of this exposure. That's always nice to have.
Yeah. I think that, I think a parallel to that is, I study, kids often and parents and how they talk about some of these issues. And in the world of race, we see that white parents often are not talking to their white kids about race. And partly it's not out of racism per se, although I'm sure that's for some folks, but largely it's they don't want to mess up. They're not really comfortable talking about it. And they're afraid if I say it the wrong way, I'll mess up, or I'll make my kid racist because they're not paying attention to it. The reality is racism is there. It's part of American society. Whites are not comfortable talking about it, but we have to just keep doing it. And we might mess up. And so if you mess up, you say, oh, I kind of said that the wrong way. Let me say it this way. And that one of the things a lot of studies are doing is trying to encourage parents to just try, just to do it in the little ways. Like, and it's okay to mess up. Like it really, it's the growth mindset of talking about these issues that if we keep trying, it'll get more comfortable, and then we'll be able to keep that dialogue going. And that the consequence of not talking about it is then all these other things can happen. And so that it's better to show up and try. It's a much, than it is to just be silent on it. And I think that's part of this showing grace is, for our colleagues, sometimes people are going to mess up, but they're coming and they're trying. And that's the crux of the battle right there.
Yeah, I think so. I know you talked about with white parents and research showing that. And yeah, I think that it's not just the parents that are a little timid about talking about it. It's even in colleagues in some of these situations, a little timid about it, especially with high risk situations, just worrying about not just only doing the right thing, but being so afraid of doing the wrong thing that's there. So I know that we have 5 minutes left. So I do want to ask you this question before we go, because I know that when people came to this session today, of course, they wanted to gain some of your expertise and they wanted to learn more about inclusive excellence and some of the impact that it has on the University of Kentucky, but also the Human Development Institute that's there. And I think that it's important that these individuals find some tactics and have some takeaways for this. So can you talk a little bit about what are some practical ways to build inclusive excellence? What are some practical ways that people here can do?
I think part of it is thinking about kind of what their jobs are in their realms of influence and evaluate every policy you have. And this can be as simple as looking at your email signature line. It can be as simple as the way in which you address groups, kind of everything you do in a given day, and evaluate, is there a way to make that more inclusive? Can I look at everything with an eye towards inclusion? I think that's part of it. One thing we know is that implicit biases that we all have influence the informal kind of non-conscious behaviors that we have. And one of the best ways to reduce that is to be really mindful and purposeful about reducing those kind of implicit biases. So things like having a moment of mindfulness at the very beginning of the day, whether it be 1 or 2 minutes to say, I'm going to be really mindful of not letting any implicit or unconscious biases affect how I interact with people. Believe it or not, that is actually really one of the most research-based effective strategies, is just saying, let me have a moment of quiet to think about that I do have these biases and that I'm going to, throughout my day, try to make sure that those don't influence my interactions. That's actually really helpful. It takes a minute or two of the day. It's about being purposeful and mindful of our interactions. And so those are two things. Part of it is then also thinking about, are there ways in which I can be more accountable to myself? If I do things that mess up, how can I apologize? How can I correct it? And being okay talking about it. I think if you run kind of offices, if there's people in which you have groups you work with, say, hey, can we have either a book club or can we have conversations exactly like what you're doing here? What can we do to have a conversation about inclusion in this workplace, so that you are making it okay to talk about it? Because I think that's a big part. It's hard for us to admit when we've messed up or to suggest changes if we're not comfortable talking about it. So thinking about ways that you can make those conversations a more normal part of the spaces in which you're operating.
Yeah, making it a normal part of it, because of course we're all learning. We're all lifelong learners, and we're taking those moments, we're taking those steps. And of course, it's important for us to hold others accountable and in a gracious way. It's important to do those, but I think that even at times it's important that we hold ourselves accountable, because it's okay to address it in this moment. Just say, oh, I messed up on that. And then change it into learning, because what that does is that's showing that you're learning. It's showing that you're doing that. And eventually what's going to happen is you're not going to say, oh, I messed up on that, let me correct that. You're going to actually do the right one. But it's important. And I think there's steps to it. It's a progression, but it's important to have there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, there are lots of phrases, for example, we have. So, I think I made a reference the other day about I forget now what it was. I think I said something about they were being really tone deaf. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I'm really sorry. That is actually a phrase I need to take out of my language. And I said that in a Zoom call and I just moved on. But like to pause and to publicly say, I'm sorry I said that. Let me hold myself publicly accountable. And then I'm not going to belabor it, but I need to also say that was actually not a thing I need to say. And then kind of moving on. So I think those examples of owning it and apologizing. And then I'm, trying to be, granted, I just used it now, but I'm using it as an example of, I think those are the things that are phrases that come in that we sometimes say without thinking. And we do those kind of microaggressions without thinking. And to say, let me pause, let me apologize, let me get better, and then move on. I think it also models for others. I can sometimes misspeak and I will try my best to catch it, apologize, and not do it in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much for telling us some of those tips. And I think those are things that we can all do. We can all work on. So I thank you so much, Dr. Cristia Brown and Spears Brown. And when we think about it, it's not just appreciation for the conversation today, but also all the work that you're doing for the Human Development Institute, all the conversation and teaching that you have for the colleagues here, and then also your work in accessibility, those initiatives that are there. If you could, just as Gail has been putting in the chat, the evaluation is just for individuals who are the audience right now. If you could just make that evaluation, because it's important that we have that transparent feedback, that we get some of that information, that way we can continue this journey in DEI and continue being better, continue to find those ways of those. And I just want to end with this right here, because I want to say this, and I want to focus on this, especially since today's conversation was on building inclusive excellence. And as we talk about it, something that goes beyond just symbolic gestures, it goes so much more than just superficial diversity that's there. I think that it's a commitment for each and every one of us. It's a commitment there to address some of the systemic barriers and things that are in policies and procedures that we can be more equitable. That way we can honor some of those underrepresented voices, and that we can address the unconscious bias, because it's important that all of us, we can show up to work being our authentic selves. We can show up and be our whole selves as well. And I think that just as Dr. Brown talked about today, that find those ways, we can build it together. And by finding those ways together, is that we can be more stronger, more inclusive here at the Human Development Institute, that we can collaborate and we can find ways to have a foundation of inclusive excellence, somewhere where not just some of us can survive, but all of us can be our very best, and that we can thrive in this environment here at the Human Development Institute. So thank you so much for participating today, for coming for that. And Dr. Brown, thank you so much. I look forward to our ongoing partnership and in our work together. And please reach out if there's anything that we can do.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to have this conversation.
All righty. Thank you all. Have a great day.